So good afternoon, members of the Management Committee. The meeting is now. For those around the table, please turn on your microphone when speaking. For those participating via Zoom, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. If you would like to comment at today's meeting, please complete the request to speak form. MAG staff can assist with any questions you may have. If you parked in the garage, a parking validation stamp is available on the information table in the hallway. If you purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. Hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. We will now begin the meeting with a roll call of all members. MAG staff, will you do the roll call?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. When I call your name, please indicate if you are present. Patrick Banger.
Present.
Thank you. Chair Barton.
Present.
Thank you. Ben Bitter.
Here.
Thank you. Jean Blackman. Chris Brady.
Here.
Thank you. Andrew Ching.
Here.
Thank you. Kim Moon as proxy for Ron Corbin. Dan Cotterman.
Here.
Thank you. Henry Darwin. Crystal Dykes. Bruce Gardner.
Here.
Thank you. Rachel Goodwin. Andy Granger. Rosa Inchasti. Suzanne Jones. Jeff Kulaga.
Here.
Thank you. Leo Liu. Reyes Medrano. Jessica Mefford Miller. Jennifer Jack as proxy for Brian Myers.
Here.
Thank you. Teresa Risa as proxy for Grady Miller. Teresa Risa.
Here.
Thank you. Gary Neese.
Here.
Thank you. Kevin Phelps.
Here.
Thank you. Calvin Pilcher. Jen Pokorski. Brian Powell.
Here.
Thank you. Justin Fair as proxy for Wynette Reed.
Here.
Thank you. Murphy as proxy for Tim Thompson.
Here.
Thank you. Zach Tretton as proxy for Jennifer Toth.
Here.
Thank you. Catherine Valenzuela.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff Gray as proxy for Bruce Reynolds. Matthew Williams.
Present.
Thank you. Tracy Montgomery as proxy for Bob Wingenroth.
Present.
Thank you. Andy Bass as proxy for Josh Wright.
Here.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed?
Jessica.
Kim Moon, proxy for Ron Corbin.
Thank you. And for Ron Corbin, thank you.
And Dave Trimble for Rachel Goodwin, Fountain Hills.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you. Our next item, could you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, before we get started, I want to recognize the service of Jim Thompson to the region. Jim has announced he will resign as city manager for Scottsdale effective December 29th, 2024, to serve as Loveland City, Colorado's city manager. We recognize Jim's service to the city of Scottsdale and the MAG region and wish him the best in his new endeavor. Next item is the call to the audience. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda, informational items or items on the agenda for discussion and not for action. 15 minutes will be provided for the call to the audience unless the chair requests an exception to this limit. I have one request to speak for the call for the audience. Ms. Barker?
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Barton and the MAG managers. And my name's Diane Barker. I reside in Phoenix, and I got to see the city lit up in red, white, and blue for this Vets Day. I put out little public service songs and pictures, of me like on my bicycle or bicycle on the bus type of thing. And so I have one that hasn't been up for even 24 hours and it's headed up toward 30 hits. I don't know whether you can hear that. Okay, so anyway, I guess the government hasn't figured out how to make any money off of me because if I'm on my bicycle, I don't pay for parking or gasoline. And my doctor thinks I'm getting healthier, although I'd like to see the system in Valley Metro to please put out more positive public service about, it's a platitude, but it's nice to be nice. I got run into when everybody knows basically how to get off an elevator. And this area, I've really been surprised how well, for not being a transit area, people really were mobilizing. But 2 weeks ago on a Saturday morning, I was getting off with my little bicycle. I take up about 3/4 of the thing, but basically either I have my hand up just to know some of these over anxious people. A woman with a grocery cart was intent on getting on. And I said, wait. And she said, I have to get this card on. And she shoved it into my leg that's already been injured. Fortunately, my Taekwondo one's still there. So I went to the doctor on that. And they said, well, we'll have you back over at physical therapy. So that's how I'm able to still do what I do and survive. There is a EPA, the Motorola spill is going to have a hearing at Burton Bar tonight at 5 to 7, and then a 45-day thing. It's in the Mag area, and they've sold the Motorola. Interestingly, Baker Corporation, I think, is going to make a data center there. And the class action suit for that Superfund spill was the person was named Baker. I happened to go to that litigation. And actually, I was interested. I read 25 volumes of that case. They dismissed the case. They said they'd have to medically monitor everybody. Everybody paid their attorney fees, and all the attorneys were on the government.
Thank you, Ms. Barker. MAG also provides the opportunity for members of the public to submit written comments via the MAG website. Any comments received 2 hours prior to the meeting may have been shared with committee members in advance of the meeting for consideration and will be included in the formal minutes. Staff, just to confirm, we have no written or online comments for today's meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll now proceed to the informational items. Items 4A through 4C are informational only. And does any member of the committee have any questions or request a presentation on these items? Hearing and seeing none. Next agenda item is item number 5, approval of the consent agenda. Items 5A through 5J on the consent agenda. Does any member of the committee have questions or request a presentation on any of these items? Hearing and seeing none. Prior to approval of the consent agenda, we already discussed, there are no written comments, so we'll skip over that for now. Is there a motion to approve items 5A through 5J?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Phelps and seconded by Mr. Cotterman. We'll have those participating in the meeting online take part in the voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote so staff can count the people's names whose cameras were not on. Can I have the voice vote of those in the room and those online? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Members, please leave your cameras on. Staff, can you take a roll call vote of the members participating virtually who did not turn on their camera?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I call your name, please indicate how you vote. Suzanne Jones.
Aye.
Thank you. Everyone else has their cameras on, and Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item number 6, the notice of federal discretionary grant funding award for US 60 35th Avenue Indian School Road grade separation project. This item is on the agenda for recommendation, information, and discussion. Patrick Stone, Deputy Transportation Director, will present this item.
Thank you, Chair Barton, members of the Management Committee. A pleasure to be here to sub in for Mr. John Bolin today to present this item. So before I get started talking about this item, I always like to give a little bit of background, set the context for what we're discussing today. Back in time, 2021, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was passed, largest surface transportation investment in the history of this nation, significantly increased both discretionary funding, formula funding, and really going to focus on the discretionary part today. Not only did it continue existing grant opportunities, it did provide new grant opportunities and significantly increase the funding therewith. So when we talk about regional grants or discretionary grants, the region kind of has a strategy of how we approach these grants. These take a lot of work. They're not something you can just easily put in for. There's a lot of data that is involved. There's a lot of work to assemble these grant applications. So the region developed a strategy that said, if we're going to pursue these grants, we need to be very thoughtful. Therewith, we decided to go for only the big grant programs. So you're really looking at the infra, the mega grant, the RAISE grant, and then also looking at those projects already in our portfolio that would compete well for those types of funding. Reason being, as I said, these grants take a lot of effort. And also when you get one of these grants, it has a tremendous regional benefit. So the project we're talking about today, I do like this aerial. It really does kind of highlight the corridor. So we are looking at an overhead view of the intersection of US 60 Grand Avenue, 35th Avenue and Indian School Road. Of note, kind of in the lower center of that is the BNSF railway that bisects this corridor. Six-legged intersection leading to extensive traffic congestion in this area. We have significant crashes in this area. And obviously, as you can see, as evidenced by that picture, a rail conflict with the line. So kind of shifting, this is the same intersection, but I think this is a very good overhead view where you can actually see those conflict points. Starting from the lower bottom left, you see the railway running in and behind that traffic. You then move clockwise around, you see Indian School Road, which actually is grade separated from both the 60-35th intersection and the railroad. Moving around though, you can see the delays on 35th and Grand Avenue. I like this picture. This is another great drone shot. So again, you're seeing the same area. This is looking from the northwest going southeast. So you'd be traveling into Phoenix along Grand Avenue. As you can see, and it's not a surprise, there is a significant amount of backup on Grand Avenue coming up to Indian School Road. And what's really interesting, I apologize, it's a little difficult to see based on the angle, but if you look just above where it says Indian School Road, you'll notice the traffic dissipates. We really do have more of a free flow condition south of this intersection. So what did we do? Well, this project is actually already programmed. It is in the Freeway Lifecycle Program. As I mentioned earlier, we do like to find projects that are already in our portfolio to pursue discretionary grants. This one is in the Prop 400 Freeway Lifecycle Program, already programmed for construction. And then this was the proposed improvements associated with that project. So what you see, and the main improvement is elevating 35th Avenue up to form a intersection with Indian School Road, an elevated intersection with Indian School. And what you get out of this, the two key elements in the lower left of the corner, obviously Grand Avenue is now free flow. It does not stop. And as well, we get rid of all of the conflicts with the BNSF railway. So we have a good project, we have a need. How do we handle solving for that? So this is how we get into the discretionary grant. So when you look at discretionary grants, there's factors you have to consider. So when you're looking at a grant, you really want to find a project that matches well. Good competitive factors, things like this will help you get a grant. Big one, and I'm going to come back to this point time and time again, significant local funding. They want to see that you have skin in this game. I think this project especially really hit that point, not only regional funding, but funding from our partners with the city of Phoenix and from the railway itself. Demonstrated safety issues, we certainly have those there. An FRA study from the mid-2010s identified this as the second worst crash location in the United States. Congested freight corridor, you saw by those previous overhead slides, significant delay on that corridor. The project we are looking at, it's not just a roadway or a grade separation. And as you saw it, that elevated, allowing for pedestrian and bicycle improvements. So we have multimodal connectivity along with improvements for transit. And then again, this project is located in a historically disadvantaged area. Put that all together and we check all the boxes. So what grant did we pursue? Well, thinking smart and thinking regionally, we actually pursued 3 different grants. So we applied for both the, and it's got a terrible name, the MDPG, the Multimodal Discretionary Project. Essentially, they put 3 grant programs together, which was Infra Mega and the rural grants. Those go out under one. But we also looked at 2 rail grants that are done through FRA. We had both the CRISI, which is the rail infrastructure and safety improvements, and then also the railroad crossing elimination. Between the 4 project partners, we came up with pursuing a request for $146.6 million, just about 40% of the total project cost. So a significant ask on a significant project. And we were successful. As you can see on the screen, we actually received 2 different grants under the same MPDG grant. We got both a mega grant in 2 years of funding and then an infra grant. And this was actually, I thought this was really good when we got the information back from USDOT. We got our full grant request. Sometimes you ask for a lot, you get a portion of that. I think they saw the value in this project and they fully funded our ask, which is, I think it's a credit to the region and the applications that were submitted. And I want to pause real quick. Acknowledgement to City of Phoenix staff, key contributors in this. And then there was 2 MAG staff that I have to call out, Steph Stearns and Ramita Syed. They put in a lot of effort. These things they're very data heavy and you have to tell a good story. And they did just that. So what's the grant do? This was the project as it existed in the Freeway Lifecycle Program. You do see the railway funding on the top, followed by the contribution from the city. The lion's share of the funding really was made up by regional funding, and that's not a surprise. But there it is. Add in that $146 million. That's a significant chunk of change. Do a quick little, and there you see it. And essentially what this $146 million does, it's a couple things. The regional funding needs are reduced. Full stop, we don't need as much regional funding. But it's really what that does. It allows the region to reallocate those funds onto other projects within the region. So they go back into the freeway program and it allows us to advance projects. In light of last week, it also allows us to now start looking at both Prop 400 and Prop 479 projects. And as we always like to say, a rising tide raises all boats. So what do you take away from this? And I think this is the first one. It tells a story left to right, but the first one's the key one. You have to have something to bring. That dedicated half-cent sales tax was the game changer here. It allowed the region to present a very compelling argument, understanding that, these grants are going to get awarded. If it doesn't come to Arizona, it's going somewhere. They're not going to sit there and say, well, we'll come back next year, see how we do. So having that allowed us to have that correct application. The 146 million, staggering. When John and I were first looking at this, we were like, hey, how big is that compared to what we've seen? The prior 2 largest grants we'd received in the region were both in the 90 million range, one for the widening of I-10 and one for the flex lanes on I-17. 50 million more for this project. I mean, it's a staggering amount of money. I know some days we throw around the term billions. 146 million matters. And what that does, as I said, it benefits the entire region. You bring in any additional funding into the region, benefits the entire region. And as you know, it allows us to accelerate those projects in Prop 400 and Prop 479. This is just a huge win for the region, a huge win for the agencies, and I'm so proud to have been able to present this. And with that, Chair Barton, that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Patrick, for the information. I want to say on behalf of Phoenix, thank you, MAG and staff, for the hard work on this. This grant definitely benefits the entire region. Do we have any comments or questions from the committee? No? Thank you again, Patrick.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, next up is item number 7, the update on Regional Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Investment Plan implementation activities. That is a mouthful. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion. Arminta Saeed, Transportation Policy and Initiatives Program Manager, will present the update. Arminta, do you have?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members of Management Committee. Excited to be here today on the heels of the exciting news from last week, the successful passage of Proposition 479 by Maricopa County voters on November 5th. To say that this was a joint effort would be an understatement. Today's presentation would look much different if it were not for the coordinated regional support received by all of you, by all of your staff, by your elected officials, by our partner agencies, Valley Metro, ADOT, by the leadership of our executive director, by the whole MAG team, and specifically 2 key MAG staff whose names are essentially synonymous with this effort, John Bullen and Audra Kester Thomas. And so all of that success has led us to this conversation today, where the next step is now to talk about implementing the Regional Strategic Infrastructure Investment Plan, or the RSTIP for short. It is a mouthful, which is for which the dedicated half-cent sales tax extension is a critical funding source for. Before I get into a lot of the implementation activities that have been underway and that are yet to come, just a quick context reminder. So in the Regional Strategic Infrastructure Investment Plan, the dedicated half-cent sales tax is a large piece of that, but in addition, it does contain a number of other funding sources that also flow into the region, including Federal Highway Administration formula funding and Federal Transit Administration formula funding. And then that funding gets allocated to projects that are then implemented through what we call financial management tools. And so this includes the Freeway Lifecycle Program, which is implemented by ADOT, the Transit Program, the Transit Lifecycle Program, which is implemented by Valley Metro and member agencies, our Arterial Lifecycle Program, which is implemented by member agencies, and then lastly, our competitive programs also implemented by member agencies. So I'll touch on the specific activities underway and to come for each of these 4 main programs, starting with our 3 lifecycle programs. Going from Proposition 400 to 479, the number of lifecycle programs has remained the same. So each of these are going from a Prop 400 lifecycle program to a Prop 479 lifecycle program. So I'll start with talking about the Freeway Lifecycle Program. So under the Proposition 479 FLCP, there's already a defined list of freeway projects that will be funded through the Prop 479 program. They'll be funded using a number of funding sources that are available to the region, not only the dedicated half-cent sales tax, but also Federal Highway Administration formula funding, as well as highway user revenue funds. And of all the programs, this will represent the easiest transition as we go into 479, largely because there's already a 40-year partnership and history built with ADOT, and there's already a precedent set for doing a transition like this from when we went from Proposition 300 to Proposition 400. And then finally, as part of prior Prop 400 FLCP annual updates, we had received approval to initiate development efforts for key Phase 1 projects, allowing us to queue up some projects to be ready to go and be positioned really well for 479 to come online, making this all that much easier in terms of transitioning to 479. So here's a map that reflects those defined projects that are included in the 479 freeway program. It includes a number of completion projects along key freeway corridors, including on Loop 303, on Loop 101 Agua Fria, Loop 202 Santan, on State Route 24. It includes reconstruction of one of our oldest freeways, Interstate 17, construction of a new freeway, State Route 30, as well as interchange improvements across the region, including on I-10 at Baseline Road and I-10 at Jackrabbit Trail. And then, as I had mentioned, a number of key phase one projects had already initiated development efforts. And so this map here reflects the current development status of those key phase one projects. As you can see, several of them are currently working through final design, making them in a really good spot for as 479 comes online January 1st, 2026. And so this includes Loop 303 from I-17 to Lake Pleasant Parkway, as well as the improvement with the I-17 system interchange. It includes that State Route 24 completion between Loop 202 to Ironwood Drive. It includes the first of the implementation sections of the State Route 30 center segment between 67th Avenue and Loop 202. Also, some of those interchanges I had just mentioned, Jackrabbit Trail, Baseline Road on I-10, as well as the 91st Avenue connector, which is actually being completed as part of the work on the I-10 Loop 101 system interchange project. As well as, the Wild Horse Pass traffic interchange, which is being completed with the larger design build project of the I-10 Wild Horse Pass corridor. There's still work ahead of us as we look to come online with the rest of the 479 program. So the first thing to be done is updating the revenue estimates. The current revenue forecasts that are supporting the freeway program are the same ones that were completed as part of the RSTIP plan development back in 2020, fall of 2020. And so a lot of changes have occurred since then, notably the new federal surface transportation legislation, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was not taken into account when developing these forecasts. And so the updates have to take that into account. So that work is underway, and we expect that to be completed by the end of this calendar year. The other thing to be done is on the cost side, similar to the revenue forecast, the project cost estimates were also completed as part of the planned development work back in 2020, 2021 timeframe. Similarly, lots of changes have occurred since then. And so we've been working with ADOT to update those costs to the current costs. And then once we have those two pieces, we expect, let me go back. The costs, we expect those to be completed in January of 2025. And then once we have those two pieces, what we expect to be able to do is put together a specific near-term implementation plan. And what we mean by that is right now, a lot of those defined freeway projects, they have a phase associated with them. So each of those phases contains 5 years. So a phase one means that that project would come online sometime between 2026 to 2030. So once we know exactly what the revenues and the costs look like, we'll be able to associate year within that 5-year phase to those specific projects. And we expect to come back with an update on that to committees in the spring, summer timeframe of next year. Moving on to the arterial life cycle
All right,
program.
one second, Mr. Chair, this is a lot of information, so maybe it'd be good if we take a second right now to see if there are any questions for Arminta on the freeway portion of the presentation.
Any questions? Comments?
I think the bottom line there is that we know, you all know from your own experience, costs have gone up in construction. We're going to find out what that looks like working with ADOT. And we also know revenues have gone up, but not as much as costs. And so there's going to be a balancing we're going to have to do here in the spring and summer as we take a look at it. But that's always been expected, always normal. And we've done that routinely at MAG in the last 20 years, and we'll continue that effort together.
Thank you.
So I'll move on then next to the arterial life cycle program. Similar to the freeway life cycle program, there is that defined list of arterial project improvements to be funded through the Prop 479 program. Unlike the Prop 400 arterial life cycle program, the 479 program will be wholly funded by the dedicated half-cent sales tax. But similar to the Prop 400 program, it will function on a reimbursement basis, and the projects will continue to be implemented by the local agencies. Here's a map that shows those defined arterial projects that are included in the 479 arterial life cycle program. It includes improvements and widenings to a number of key arterial corridors along Camelback Road, along Indian School Road, along Dynamite Boulevard. It also includes construction of new segments of arterial roadways, including on Lone Mountain Road as well as Ocotillo Road. And then with the arterial program, where it differs a little bit from the freeway program, is step one is developing the policies and procedures that will guide how the arterial life cycle program functions. This includes how to treat things like inflation or project changes. The 479 ALCP also includes a number of agencies that were not part of the 400 ALCP, and so making sure that their feedback and input was taken into account as we developed the policies that will guide the ALCP moving forward. And so from earlier this year, a working group of member agency staff has been convening to provide that input. And we expect to come back to policy committees with a final approval for the draft recommendations of those policies in March and April of 2025. And then the next few steps follow very similar to the freeway program, where we also need to update those revenue forecasts on the same time frame. We expect that to be completed by end of calendar year, December 2024. We also need to update the regional reimbursement amount that will go towards these projects. That we expect to be a little bit behind from updating the costs associated with the freeway projects. The reason there is because it will be dependent on the approval of those policies and procedures where, we take into account how to treat inflation, and then we incorporate that into how what that reimbursement amount will look like. And then the last step again being coming up with that near-term schedule, that sequencing of projects. And then we expect all of that to be completed by summer of 2025. And I'll pause before moving on to the transit lifecycle program.
Any questions?
Just a reminder, important decision made was to go completely regional funding here, which means it should go quicker, should cost less because you're not dealing with the federal rulemaking. So that was a decision made at this table a couple years ago, which was really smart. So your staff is going to appreciate that very much. They can take you out to dinner for that.
Okay, the last of the three lifecycle programs, the transit lifecycle program. So with the Proposition 479 transit lifecycle program, it is the biggest policy shift from how the funding will function going from the Prop 400 TLCP to the Prop 479 TLCP. The TLCP in and of itself is a very multifaceted program. It includes funding for both operations as well as capital elements. And then Valley Metro will continue to be responsible for the management of the Prop 400 TLCP. And then management of the 479 TLCP will transition to MAG. This chart here shows all the different components or facets that make up the TLCP. And so the different operations components you can see here are funded through the bus transit operating assistance, as well as the bus transit regional services components. And then you've got some capital elements under the bus transit bus capital component, and then as well as the high capacity high-capacity transit component. Each of these are have their own nuances as well as their own funding policy framework on how they're intended to function under the 479 program. And so some select changes are shown here on the table in front of you. So what you're seeing highlighted are how bus operations, commuter bus, as well as ADA paratransit service, funding for those are how they function under Prop 400 versus how they will function under 479. So under 400, all three of those receive a fixed funding allocation. Under the 479 funding policy, each of those, the way the funding will function for those are all different from how they function under 400 and different from how each of them function from each other. So with bus operations, the intent with the 479 policy is that it'll be allocated to service on a cyclical basis based on a performance criteria, based on a performance-based formula, excuse me. And then with the commuter bus service, there is a dedicated funding set aside in the 479 TLCP, and how that will get allocated to different commuter bus service will be through a regional planning process. And then finally, with ADA and paratransit, because of the costs associated with ADA and paratransit, under the 479 policy, this service will be limited to the strict federal definition of this service. And so those are the main differences moving from 400 to 479. However, with fiscal year 2026, we are specifically recommending that we treat this 1 year a little bit differently because it's a transition year. As you can see, and as you probably know, fiscal 2026 is made up of both Prop 400 and Prop 479. So Prop 400 goes till the end of December 31st, 2025. So fiscal 26 starts on July 1st, 2025. And so for those first 6 months of fiscal 2026, it continues to be Prop 400 collections. And then Prop 479 collections begin as of January 1st, 2026. And so the second 6 months of fiscal 2026 through June 30th, 2026 is Prop 479 collections. And so because of that, we're recommending that we treat fiscal 2026, we take it very conservatively, and we treat it as a transition year. And what we do is we just continue to fund the operations in place as they are under Prop 400, using Prop 479 money. And so what that would mean is those funding policy changes that I had just mentioned on the last slide, the earliest they would come online is fiscal 2027, so July 1st, 2026 at the earliest. And there's still lots of work ahead of us with the Transit Lifecycle Program. So there's been a project that's been underway working to define the processes within the funding policy framework that's been set as part of the RSTIP. And that's been underway since May of 2024. In addition, there's been a member agency working group that's been convened starting from August 2024. This will continue throughout this year, over the next year, to continue to provide input, and specifically a lot of close coordination to be had with Valley Metro as well as City of Phoenix. And then as that as that working group completes different elements of the work, we intend to come back to policy committees and provide updates. And so we expect to start initiating those in spring of 2025. And I will pause before I move on to the last program.
maybe you're going to talk about this later. That whole transition is kind of interesting, right? Because luckily we didn't have to go without it. We didn't have a gap year. We got overlap. So, you'll have to help me. I'm the very shallow understanding, but there's a lot of projects still in Prop 400 that are funded that are still underway. So as long as how are you going to play that through, right? So let's say a project in Prop 400 is underway as far as design, maybe even construction documents, but let's say the dollars come short because of escalating construction costs. So how's that discussion? How are we going to treat existing programs? Are they going to stay in the Prop 400 and then there's a Prop 479? How does that work?
Just to clarify, you're not talking transit, you're talking more about
Everything.
a
right?
freeway project
Yeah,
or a street
sorry.
project. Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, I get the transit,
Yeah.
kind of, we can work that. I think the performance-based is going to help out with that a lot regardless, right? But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going broader scale. How do you imagine that being worked out?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of Management Committee, it's a little bit different between the freeway program and the arterial life cycle
Okay.
program. The key is really that you're right, there will be overlap, but keeping the funding sources discrete from each other and tracking that. The Prop 400 funded projects, they will continue there are a few large projects near the end of Prop 400, and they'll continue for a while. And the funding from 400 has been set aside for those projects. And so they'll just have to they will be kept very separate from the 479 projects as they come online. Now, to your point, if there are issues with cost changes, if there are gaps, shortfalls, etc., those will have to be different policy conversations where we come back to committee and
Okay. So that's still to
Yeah,
be discussed.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
So Arminta, to that point, does that mean that we would have to reallocate Prop 400 funding that is allocated to existing projects? Or does that mean that 479 can be a backstop in the examples that Chris gave?
Mr. Chair, members of Management Committee, that would be a decision made by Policy Committee. It would ultimately be direction that you provide to us.
Thank you.
Arminta,
I have a couple of
we're tight on
questions,
time,
Mr.
so
Chair.
let's get through this
Yep.
next part really
Okay.
quick.
I have a couple of questions and clarification, Mr. Barton, regarding your question on projects funded by 400 and then some of that carryover being funded by 479. Arminta, if I'm not mistaken, that would only apply to the highway and arterial projects. So, Mr. Barton, for you, for capital extension, which is funded by Prop 400, should there be overrun, that's not going to be permissible for funding in 479. And I just want to make sure
Good
we're
point.
clear on that.
That's good. Yeah.
And then question for you, Arminta, or comment really, the memo references coming back over FY25 to committees, I assume including this body, Transportation Policy Committee and Regional Council, to advance this. I just want to note that the Regional Public Transportation Authority and state statute does own the Public Transportation Fund. And so any shift in ownership, or really probably a shift in governance and accounting of that, would also need to come back through Valley Metro RPTA board during that same time frame. Thank you.
And then I'll just touch on the last piece, competitive programs, really quickly. The difference with these is that they're not discrete projects like our 3 lifecycle programs. They are funding set aside for areas of future need. Here's a comparison of the competitive programs under Prop 400 versus under Prop 479. As you can see, we've increased the number of competitive programs under Prop 479. A lot of these programs are in different phases of development. A number of them are dependent on updating a regional plan, such as the Regional Active Transportation Plan, the Regional ITS Plan. those are the status on those. The air quality program is largely a continuation of the air quality program under Prop 400. And so this includes the competitive programs for street sweepers, for paved, unpaved roads. Both of those are moving through their typical process right now. The arterial competitive programs, widening and rehabilitation, a presentation on those, but those lots of work underway. Those two will be the first out the gate. And I'll wrap up here, but essentially lots of work has been underway and a lot more work to come in the next 6 months or so.
Thank you, Arminta. Any closing comments or questions from the group?
I'm glad we have this problem.
It's better than others.
Well, it's better than not having
Right.
worry about 470.
So, thank you.
Jeff, could I make a comment?
Sure,
I think
go ahead,
this room is full of folks who do a lot of doing, and very rarely do we get to talk about the doing. But could you imagine if it did not pass? It's kind of what Chris is going at. I mean, will be lots of problems. It's never enough. But for Prop 486 in Pinal County and this one to pass at the number, at the rate, is so amazing. And, you know, huge shout out to Audra, John, Ed, and your team, everyone in this room to help make that pass. Not everything passes. And to see it pass at this number, I think gives a message in the representative form of democracy, which we live in, that says there's trust that's built in this establishment to keep things going. Economic development is based upon our street and road system. If you've ever driven in Orange County or driven in LA County to get that, I get to sit next to Surprise here, 62 miles. It's only an hour and like 10 minutes away right in this moment. And it's amazing that we have this infrastructure, and to be able to have our people who are here to say, keep going, is great. And so I just want to say a huge shout out to everybody. And we need to talk about this doing every once in a while. I don't know if we do that enough as managers, but to be able to be here, I can't even imagine what the alternative would be if we didn't have this funding source. Thank you.
Great comments, Brent. Thank you, Arminta. Next up is item 8, the update on the Regional Competitive Programs Arterial Rehabilitation and Arterial Widening Development Activities. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion. Patrick Stone, back at the scene again, Deputy Transportation Director, will present the update.
Thank you, Chair Barton, members of Management Committee. Kind of exciting today. We're actually really telling a good story today. You saw what Arminta presented to you. This is like the next chapter in that book. So we're actually, and to Mr. Bitter's comment, this is where the rubber hits the road, where we start taking these plans into action. So today I'm providing an update on the first 2 arterial competitive programs. Arminta kind of already alluded to the RSTIP. I'm going to go fast through this. Obviously, as we always talk about, this is a slide we go to often. You see the investment plan. Of note, the lower left-hand corner, those programmatic investments. Specifically today, we're looking at the 2, the arterial rehab and the arterial widening. I'm not going to go through the RSTIP. I think Arminta did a great job explaining what that is. Highlighting in the lower right-hand corner, we're talking about the competitive programs that are administered by our member agencies. Keep that in mind. Program overviews. So there's some commonality between these 2 programs. We took them together through a working group process that was very intentional because we knew there was a lot of similarities. We wanted to be very respectful of your staff's time. So we found a way to leverage that by developing these 2 together. So these are the first 2 new competitive programs developed under the RSTIP. They are the 2 that are fully funded with federal funds, hence why we could start them first. We were not waiting on the passage of Prop 479 to begin activities. And I want to stop here for a moment. This was a collaborative effort between MAG staff and your member agency staff. We have had 24 agencies participate in these working groups. Most meetings, we have between 30 and 40 of your staff in the virtual room helping us work through this process. So some general items, highlight the 2 programs. Yes, I've acronymed them because they're terribly long, but there's the ARRP and the AWP. You can see the funding amounts on the screen. Just $40 million a year, significant amount of funding, over $800 million for the life of the RSTIP. We intend to do the first call for projects early next calendar year, and we will program 3 years of funding, fiscal years 26, 27, and 28. And the working group also agreed, and it kind of makes sense, that the technical review, that first pass of the applications, will start at the MAG Street Committee. Moving forward, this is kind of an interesting pivot. So eligible phases, that's always a big thing. What do we fund with these? What do we do? So we said as a working group, We're okay with funding scoping, design, right-of-way, and construction. And really why I want to focus this slide, this is a bit of a pivot from where we were previously. Previous calls for projects focused exclusively on construction. That's where we were spending the dollars. Listening to the agencies, they said we would like the opportunity to look at the full project lifecycle when we consider funding. So pending considerations, this is really why I'm here today and why I'm talking to you. We do have some items and some toggle points that we're really looking for direction on. So the first one, required match. How much funding does the region contribute? How much funding does your agency contribute? We started with the knowledge that we do have the arterial life cycle program. It is the most equivalent to these two programs. That currently is a 70-30 split. So 70% regional reimbursement, 30% member agency contribution. Staff recommends keeping that. Reason really being, it's kind of the sweet spot. If you go to a higher reimbursement, you're going to have fewer projects. Go to a lower reimbursement, it may put an undue burden on your agencies. Funding limits. Traditionally, we've not used funding limits in doing calls for projects. These are bigger projects. We know that, full stop. So we're recommending $7 million in regional reimbursement. That's just the regional contribution. It doesn't speak to the project size, but we felt $7 million against the size of the programs was a pretty good spot to actually land that plane, if you will. Moving on, project length. That was something we don't traditionally talk about, but it was a consideration we had. Larger projects tend to be, longer projects, excuse me, tend to be more expensive. But going to the previous slide in the funding match, well, if you have a cap, theoretically that self-limits the size of a project. And then finally, and this is the one I really wanted to emphasize, safety. You've heard Ed talk about this. We've done presentations on this. Safety is a core component of everything we do. We know that. This is where we have the opportunity to translate that into action. And so one of the recommendations, something a bit new, doing road safety assessments in project development. Oftentimes we look at road safety assessments after a roadway's in place. This is saying, hey, as you're developing the project, think about safety. What safety improvements could you potentially include in the development of that project? I'll pause quickly here. Any questions or comments on these first couple of items?
Mr. Brady?
Just real quick, can you go back to the what's eligible now? Did I see the word utility? Is that
Yes.
right away? So which are you talking about?
It's apologies, a longtime ADOT veteran here before I came to MAG. Right of way and utilities, they kind of throw those together in sort of the same space. So it's utility relocations. So if there are utilities in the way of the project, you have to be able to relocate them.
Oh, okay.
So that's all that is.
Not replacing utilities that may be.
Nope.
So
Totally.
that 7 million just got lost.
We'd have
Okay.
spent it already.
I'm sorry. I was just thought, well, did someone just slip in
No,
utilities?
it's just utility relocations. Thank you, sir. All right, moving on. So now I'm going to get into the specific projects. First, starting with the ARRP. There's the project itself, or the program itself. It has a very clear objective that we worked with the working group, really enhancing regional mobility, upgrading existing roadways, accounting for safety and mobility when you do it. So a very pretty concise, clear objective. Eligibility, you'll see this on the other program. The arterial roadway network. It's the arterial program, i.e. the arterial roadway network, looking at the mile grid. Also those arterials that do provide access to freeways and highways, as well as other key arterial corridors. And then we had 4 goals really associated with it that kind of run throughout the program. Improving safety, obviously goal 1, enhancing the safety for all roadway users. So we're not just focused on any one mode, increasing mobility, and then, and this is kind of a good one, but maintaining the region's investment in transportation. Obviously, this is critical. You have to maintain that system that you have. And so we do have a couple of pending considerations on this specific one. Really, and this is where we get into and please stop me if you have any questions, but these are the evaluative criteria. This is how we will evaluate the applications that are developed and there's really a twofold process, both quantitative, that data-driven side, and the qualitative, that's more the nuanced side. So first, these are the 3 quantitative factors. Top of mind, obviously, pavement roughness. If we're talking about roadway reconstruction, we would want to look at the surface. Again, a consideration for safety, looking at the serious fatal crash rate, and then AADT, traffic volume. What are the volumes on the roadway? And then we have the qualitative criteria. We have 4 criteria. You can see the weighting for the 4 criteria. We have safety and mobility improvements. highlight unique project attributes. That really allows your agency to tell the story. What is this project about? Does it meet the goals of the program? That's a critical piece. And then finally, how and have you engaged the community on your project? I did the math for you, the two together. So 60% would be the quantitative score and 40% would be the qualitative score. When the working group first started, we had this at 75-25, but we realized with really emphasizing mobility and connectivity, 60-40 made more sense. Questions on this particular one? All right, thank you, everyone. Arterial widening, the AWP. It's kind of a similar vein to the reconstruction, but it really is increasing regional mobility again. But this is more looking at capacity, either through improving the capacity on existing roadways or looking at extending that arterial network. Eligibility is exactly the same as the other program. And goals, we do have a couple of extra goals here. It's expanding capacity, looking at new roadways, but again, we bring in some other components providing connectivity, again, protecting the users of the roadway system, support economic competitiveness, and then again, maintain the region's investment in its infrastructure. So again, we have a bifurcated evaluative process. This one, we actually have more quantitative factors. Again, we start with volume. We do also look at the reliability of the roadway network. How well is it functioning? We have both that and the travel time index. Again, we bring in a safety consideration. Here we actually have a twofold safety consideration. First is the serious fatal crash rate. What is the frequency we're seeing serious and fatal crashes on that roadway segment? But then the other one is a quantitative measure of the non-motorized crashes. So sort of separating out the crash rate and saying how many crashes are we seeing that involve no non-motorized users? And then again, we have a qualitative factor. It is the same four factors. They're equally weighted here so far at 25% each. Again, if I do the math, this one is a little different. It stayed at the 75-25, so 75% quantitative and 25% qualitative. I will pause here. If there's questions on these particular criteria, we can certainly have that conversation.
Mr. Chair, I had a question. Hey, Patrick, Bruce Gardner with Queen Creek. When the committees looked at these two programs, was there any discussion on keeping the percentages the same for ease of submission?
Chair Barton and members of the committee, Mr. Gardner, actually, they did start at the same rate. So when we first started this and we had the first working group meetings, they're actually both at 75-25. Mm-hmm. And so the conversation with the working group and talking about what the intent of the rehab and reconstruction program was, we shifted that down to 60-40. But within the working group itself, there wasn't any, that was kind of where we had ended up when we finished up the activities in August.
Did they discuss reducing the widening to 60-40?
It wasn't brought up within the working group itself. We've had subsequent conversations to identify, hey, what would there be some logic in moving to a different evaluative criteria percentage breakout?
Yeah. And sorry for the additional question, Mr. Chair. Is it theoretically the same stretch of road could qualify for both?
In theory, you could do it if you did have a roadway that you were widening, but that you were also doing rehab reconstruction and meeting the goals. The other one, I guess it could be that you could submit for both. We've not worked through that in the working group as to how we would handle, can you submit two applications for the same project, or do you really have to pick one group or the other? But at this point, theoretically, yes, that would be eligible.
Yeah, just one final comment, not a question. When you look at high growth cities, a lot of the cities on the outskirts, it's easier to focus on quantitative, on the qualitative type of scenarios versus quantitative, specifically like economic development and growth like that. And so from the town of Queen Creek side, when we look at the widening, which we would put forward more often than the rehab, is we would like to see those percentages be the same, 60-40. But that's just a suggestion I have for the committee.
Mr. Cotterman?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo what was just said. I think that applies quite well in Buckeyes, and would like to see the same ratios if possible.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks. I agree with the previous two comments as well. I think Mr. Powell mentioned earlier that economic development is founded upon infrastructure. And if we're focusing on economic development, there's not really a factor on this that considers economic development other than highlights unique project attributes. And so I think for economic development purposes, it's always beneficial for us to consider that as part of it. So certainly would agree that 60-40 seems to be an appropriate split here.
Thank you.
Chris?
So previously under this program, it was 75-25.
So as we've been developing it, these are two new programs. They don't.
Right. So this was,
but yeah.
that was where it started from.
Yep.
Is there any, what was maybe the premise of where you started? 70-30 sounds like a ratio we've heard before. Where did the 75-25 come from?
Thank you, Chair Barton, members of the Management Committee, Mr. Brady. We kind of started from looking at other programs that had been previously done. We have a few parallels. We have other programs that we've done, regional competitive programs that are split between quantitative and qualitative. Ratios range. The most probably equivalent was the Pinal County Arterial Bridge Program. That started at 65-35. But we have the roadway safety program. We talk about safety being a point of emphasis. That was at 75-25. And apologies, these are all quantitative to qualitative splits. As well as our bike ped program. That also was 75-25. So I think as we were building, we were using some historical context just to set a baseline to have conversations with the working group. It was more, we have to start with a number somewhere to get the conversation going.
Yeah. So, and maybe, I guess that 60-40 seems like we're almost getting, there's a distinction between that quantitative and qualitative, I think. I guess I wouldn't be comfortable going completely that direction, but I can see a compromise in between maybe. Because the other program, this is for widening.
Correct.
The other program was for what?
Rehab. The rehab and
So
reconstruction.
for those of us who are trying to do economic development by infill and rehab of existing commercial neighborhoods, while economic development, I get it, for high growth is build it bigger, build it newer. For some of us, economic development, as we're going back into those older neighborhoods, is coming back and restoring roads, replacing aging infrastructure. So I want to be careful that maybe they don't need to be too far apart. And if we're not going to go that far apart, because I think I agree, economic development can be achieved by bigger, wider roads. But for some of us who are working very hard to bring back economies that where commercial has gone away, sometimes those kinds of projects where refreshing the roads, replacing, resurfacing can send a message too. So maybe there's a compromise in here that gets us between these two. And frankly, I would say let's try to make them balanced between the two, because I think some of us could argue the economic development purposes just as well in one group versus the other. So.
And then Chris, the conversations that we've had with our staff at the city, I think we would be supportive of that as well if we wanted to go in that direction. I think 60-40 may be a bit too far, but.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
So likewise, I think for Goodyear, we would support kind of reevaluating 60-40 or compromise in between. So I think keeping them consistent and reevaluating makes sense. So thank you.
Thanks.
Chair, if I could just clarify, Mr. Brady, and your statements, are you suggesting that you would support parity between the
Yes,
funding
sure.
ratios, whatever that is, but
Probably
maybe
not going
something.
as far as we did with the other.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Also, to be more specific, Mr. Brady, are you suggesting there should be an economic development component to both?
I was just responding to the argument, why there need to be a distinction, and maybe we've come to the conclusion, despite the best efforts to maybe create a distinction. I think we're finding out we could different, some of us could argue one or the other as a reason that's going to promote economic development. So maybe we need to think about widening and what's the right word? It's not resurface,
Rehab.
Rehab. I mean, that's what a lot of us are doing, right? We're in those older neighborhoods, rehabbing the streets, the infrastructure to rejuvenate and try to attract businesses and quality development into our neighborhoods. So maybe separating the two is what's maybe created some of the angst, and maybe there's a way to try to find a balance where they're on. My suggestion, doesn't, obviously take it back to your committee, maybe keeping them the same so we don't have this kind of one benefits and a different type of project than another, and maybe it's somewhere between where we're at with each one of these. Maybe that's just my idea.
So a follow-up question is, on the widening projects, is it an allowable activity to reconstruct the existing pavement? Because a lot of times the widening is difficult, and so you end up doing that anyway. So if that's already eligible, then that all would be under this program anyway.
Thank you, Chair Barton, Ms. Jack. Yeah, that was actually one of the conversations that came up in the working group was if you're going to go out and widen the roadway, you're going to be impacting the existing pavement. So yeah, that had come up as an eligible activity. So where we're at, I'm going to go very quickly. As we sit here in November, appreciate all of the feedback. That's why we came here, was to get those updates. We're going to reconvene the working group over the next month or so. I'm looking at a couple meetings in December. That's exactly what we're going to do, is take this feedback back to the working group, start considering those things you brought forth. And what that'll do is it'll inform the development of these policies that will come back before this committee sometime early in 2025, again, for that consideration. So we will bring these back based on the feedback, based on what we've done, and then looking to do a call for projects sometime in the spring. With that, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick. Any other questions before Patrick walks off? Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
All right. Tight on time, but item number 9, amendment to the MAG fiscal year 24-25 biannual unified planning work program and budget for the pavement condition data. This item is on the agenda for recommendation of approval. Brian Rubin, Transportation Planner, will present this item.
Thank you very much, Chair Barton, members of Management Committee. In the interest of respecting your time, I'm going to advance this directly to our action request today. To give a bit of context before we put this up on the screen, as we just talked about with Patrick's presentation, with identification of these upcoming competitive programs, we need to identify data sets to support these quantitative evaluations. This item represents an opportunity that we identified to both procure that information and provide some valuable information back to you, our member agencies. So should this request be approved, MAG intends to procure or sole source regionally applicable pavement condition data. This will be used to benefit our quantitative scoring. However, it will also be made available to you, our member agencies, for your use. This would be great to either, this would be great to supplement and validate your own data collection and go out and get data for areas that you need collections on, but you don't have programs set up currently. Happy to answer any specific questions you might have, but as I said, in the interest of time, we are skipping right ahead to our requested action for you today.
Do we have any questions from members of the committee? Comments, questions, concerns? Ed, anything?
Just, this is going to be a valuable resource for your staff. So and our staff loves it when your staff uses this stuff. So it's your information, use it, and you can use it for these quantitative analyses. And Brian and his team have done a great job of pulling this together.
Andrew? Oh, sorry, I thought you had a question. Okay, we have no online or written comments on this item. So is there a motion to recommend approval? Sounds like.
Yep, so moved.
Mr. Ching wants to move it forward, and second by Mr. Phelps. So now we've got the motion. So those participating in the meeting online take part in the voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote. I have a voice vote. In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, say nay. Staff, can you now take a roll call vote of the members participating virtually who did not turn on their cameras?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All cameras are on and the motion passes.
Thank you. On to item 10, which is an air quality update. Matt Poppin, Environmental Director, will present this update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Management Committee. In brief, what we wanted to do today, you've heard me talk over the last several months about our ozone strategy and how we're going to try and attain the 2015 ozone standard. So at your seat, we just wanted to give you a summary sheet that you can refer to over time that describes MAG's 3 parallel efforts to attain the ozone standard. That first effort being turning off the existing sanctions clocks, a plan that's going to come before your policy, before this committee and regional council in April at the latest to do that. The second item is to develop a serious area plan once we get reclassified to a serious area. And then third, our ongoing efforts with EPA to engage them on the issues that are important with us: ozone science, wildfires, international emissions, and the efforts we're doing on there. At the bottom of the help sheet is sort of a timeline of some important ozone dates that you can kind of keep track of. And then just the second page of that handout is just some really ozone basics. How is ozone formed? Where does it come from? What's the status of our region? What's the size of the non-attainment area? So we just really wanted to put this together to be a helpful resource for you. And then lastly, today, I would just add one of the items that you recommended for approval on the consent agenda today was a new project, to do what we call a 179B demonstration. That's going to help us determine how much ozone is from international sources of emissions. And that's going to be really key for us to meet our strategy 2 here of developing a viable plan. Because the only way we're going to submit a plan to EPA that's viable is if we know the impact from international emissions. So we appreciate your recommended approval on that as well. With that, if there's any questions, happy to take them.
Mr. Brady?
Can we get this digitally, or that would be helpful too? Because there may be opportunity to share this with other elected officials. I think so. If we could get it digitally, that'd be great.
Absolutely, we will provide those to you.
Any additional comments, questions? Thank you, Matt.
Last thing I'd add on this is sometime between now and February the 3rd, EPA will officially and formally designate our area serious non-attainment. For everybody who's not been in this room or your mayors, they've not been following this, that will be probably new to them. It's exactly what we've been talking about for the last 9-10 months. It'll probably get some media attention, but it is simply what we've been talking through here. So it won't be new, but it will be new to anybody who's not been paying attention to this, which means everybody who's not in this room or your mayors probably.
All right. Next up, item 11. This is on the agenda for information. It's the executive director's report. Ed?
Real quickly, I'm not going to go through slides. I'll just say you're probably asking, why is this candy in front of me? So for you all, you know, yeah, it's like those old puzzles, right? So for Maricopa members at 479 and for Pinal members on 486, congratulations, you got the money. It's a lifesaver. And now this is actually nerd flavored candy cane. Now we're all transportation nerds for the next 20 years, right? So enjoy a little sugar blast, but really seriously, thank you to you, your staff, for supporting your mayors, your elected officials as they push this. We are hoping that it gets to a 60% pass rate. That's sort of a vanity. Right now it's like at 59.8. The last one was at 58.6. In 2004, it passed at 58.6. So we're trying to beat that, but 50 plus 1 was plenty. So congratulations to all of you. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Item 12 is a legislative update on the agenda for information and discussion. Samantha Klakalak, Government Relations Project Manager, present the update. Nothing today. All right. Any requests for future agenda items by members of the committee? Mr. Phelps.
Yes, Mr. Zerker, as you know, we've been discussing in West Valley the idea of the different technologies around micro trenching. I've also talked to some other city managers. I was wondering if you could convene maybe an ad hoc group, and I think talk to several city managers would be willing to help serve on it, where we could really look at kind of what are the micro trenching technologies that are currently available, perhaps look nationally around data gathering that would start giving us a better understanding of how those technologies are wearing and operating, And then maybe even looking at things like license agreements, what kind of, what are other communities doing in terms of how they're issuing license agreements? How are they dealing with if they have to go in and make an emergency repair where they have to cut a data line, which may put a neighborhood out of action for a period of time? Just how are they dealing with that? So I thought perhaps MAG would be well suited to help kind of bring that information together and not looking for a policy other than just really information that we could share to the other cities.
Do have staff who've been tracking the micro trenching issue, compile data, and convene those who are interested to share that information. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, we've discussed that in East Valley as well, and I'd be more than happy to sit on that working group and include nano trenching into that as well.
Thank you. Anything else? Any additional comments from the membership? All right. Next meeting is scheduled for January 8th, 2025, after the holidays. So happy holidays, everyone. And this meeting is adjourned.
Yeah.